So what's this, Joe?
All right, so these are the highlights, some of the highlights of the collections. We actually have stuff on the table here from Charlestown, Faneuil Hall, Boston Common, and Back Bay. So I'm just gonna dive right in.
Do it.
All right, so these three large iron spheres are actually cannonballs. These came from the Battle of Bunker Hill itself, June 17th, 1775. This is one of the only artifacts in the whole lab that we actually have a day for, because everything else we have ranges, but we know this happened on that day. And this is one of about a dozen cannonballs that we actually have here on the site.
Wow.
This is called a bar shot. So what it is 3 different cannonballs connected together by these iron rods, and as those got fired out of the cannons, they would spin. And they would normally be used to take out ships in the harbor, but in this case, they're being fired from the north end to Charlestown to burn down the city. But the fact that they were using things that would normally be fired at ships means that they were just throwing everything they had at Charlestown to make it just disappear. They did a pretty good job because there was pretty much nothing left of the city once they were done.
Wow. So this would have been the redcoats.
Exactly. Yeah. From over by Copp's Hill Burial Ground, firing onto Charlestown.
Wow. Can I touch one?
Yeah, please. So you can tell that they're a little bit light or smaller than most people would think as a cannonball, which would be a larger sphere. So
they're
actually
heavy
small. They're
though.
very heavy. Yeah.
They are really heavy.
So we have some that have these rods that connected to each other, and we have some that are just the cannonball itself.
Wow.
So you can see that there's been some rust done to them. They've been in the ground for about 250 years. And one of the things that I want to get to in the lab is some iron conservation, so we can actually make sure these last forever, because we don't want them to rust away to dust. So because Charlestown was burned to the ground, we have a really great snapshot of what was going on in the 1700s in Charlestown. So a couple of the other artifacts we have here actually came from those privies that I was telling you about. So this is a teapot. This is made of creamware, so we know it's sometime after 1760, because that's when creamware was invented. And you can see it's actually in really good shape. It's just missing its handle in the top, but you can tell that people were just tossing all the broken dishes that they had into these privies.
Yeah. It looks very much like a teapot would today.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? It's like one of those technologies that it really has not changed.
It has not changed at all. We also have these are wine bottles from the 1740s.
Looks like a port wine bottle right now.
Yeah, and this is the tumbler. Wow. Tumblers haven't changed much either. This is made a little bit differently than we have now. You can see the mark on the bottom where the iron rod was put on it for when they blew it in the furnace.
Cool.
But you can see they haven't changed in style very much. These all would have been used at the actual tavern. This is a Chinese import from China, made in China, in the 1700s. It's all hand painted. Came over, ended up in the privy eventually at the tavern. Wow. And then we also have some of the dishes that they were using at the tavern. This is a white salt glazed stoneware.
So you get your French fries on that.
Exactly. But yeah, as you can see, it's been broken and pieced back together. A lot of these artifacts, once they broke, they got tossed in the privy. This is an artist's reconstruction of what the Three Cranes Tavern used to look like back in the 1700s.
Very cool. So now, do you have anything from pre-colonial times?
Exactly. So Boston Common is one of the best preserved areas of the city because it's never been developed. And there's been a lot of work done on it, but fundamentally there's never been buildings built upon it. So we actually have good probability for Native American sites to have survived, even though they probably would have been all over the city. There's been a lot of development, obviously, and
that disrupts. Building on something makes it harder.
So if it's there in the ground and you dig a hole to put a cellar in for an old house, then the site's gone.
Yeah, okay.
So Boston Common was a great place for archaeological sites for the Native American period. So we actually have here 3 different artifacts. 2 of them are stone tools. I'll start with the middle one. This is actually a piece of pottery. It's about 2,000 years old, made by Native Americans. You see it's pretty thick. The outside of it, that texture, is actually done by fabric made out of probably reeds or bass fibers from trees that's been pressed into the side of it while the clay was still wet. Fired on a small fire to harden the clay, broken and then left in the common.
Oh wow! So was the texture decorative? That was just
It's hard to tell because it would have been done with coils. So they would have done the coil up the whole body, and then they would have had to pat it smooth with something. And sometimes that would have just been with whatever they had. So it's hard to tell just based on that whether they were using the fabric to help paddle it, or if they were trying to decorate it, or probably both. Yeah. Would have left the texture that they would have liked. This arrowhead right here, this is a true arrowhead in the sense that the bow and arrow wasn't even invented until 1,000 years ago. So anything older than that, it can't be an arrowhead because they weren't there. This is a true arrowhead. It's between 400 and 1,000 years old. The tip is broken, meaning it probably hit something, so it's probably fired. This was found near the hill in the middle of Boston Common, Flagstaff Hill, or Soldiers and Sailors Monument now. And then this artifact here, We know
Yeah,
it was
what
a
is
spear point, possibly a knife. We know it's not an arrowhead because this is 5,000 to 7,000 years old. Right now, it's the oldest artifact that we know in downtown Boston.
5 to 7,000
5 to 7,000 years old.
That is awesome.
And we know that based on the style of it. It kind of has this like tree shape to it with the base. It's broken, so we're missing the tip. Maybe it was dropped. Maybe it was a hunter had broken it and took it off of the spear point, tossed it, and added another spear tip to it. But this is currently the oldest artifact we know of, and the rock that it's made out of comes from the Blue Hills in Quincy.
Oh, wow.
So that's the oldest one right now. The other artifacts that I pulled out to show is some stuff from Faneuil Hall. Faneuil Hall is from 1742, and in order to build Faneuil Hall, they actually filled in a tiny harbor. So if you can imagine, back in the 1700s, early 1700s, you could sail a ship practically up to City Hall.
Wow.
So it was water right in front
all
of
the
it.
way up there.
So they filled that in with basically all the garbage of the city went into that little harbor to fill it in so they could build Faneuil Hall. So essentially what they did is they emptied all the privies and all your garbage from daily use just went in there. So these artifacts here come from pre-1742.
Okay.
So we know it had to happen before then. This is some of the dating techniques we have. We have to find something that we can say it's either before or after, and that's how we date these artifacts.
Okay.
So Faneuil Hall was built in 1742. You know that everything underneath it has to be before that, because otherwise the building couldn't have been there. So these we know are from before that. This is a piece of...
It's beautiful.
Yeah, this is made in England. It's called Staffordshire Slipware. It's been combed and decorated. It's probably part of a loaf pan, a much larger pan. But this is some of the larger pieces that we have when things haven't been trampled, like on Boston Common for a couple thousand years or a couple hundred years for the historic stuff.
What's this cloth thing here?
This is actually a leather shoe.
What?
It's about 300 years old.
What?
The good thing about Faneuil Hall is that because it was a filled-in bay, it was a wet site. So the leather preserved well, the bone preserved well, the fiber preserved well. So this has been conserved. So it's been treated with chemicals so to stop it from decomposing. Because now that it's brought out of that wet conditions, it can start to decompose again.
Right.
But you can actually see all of the threads are
the
still in the
stitching.
sole
That's
of
awesome.
the shoe, and it's been
There's
worn
the
down
heel.
there where it's probably a lady's shoe. It's hard to tell though. It's been worn through a bit on the sole of the foot of the shoe. So. And then obviously been crushed from being underground for 300 years. More German stoneware.
What's this in the jar over
So yeah, this jar has a great story. So this artifact is, normally we don't keep things in jars in water. It's just not a common practice. So
it's a little creepy.
It's a little different from what you've seen everywhere else here.
Yeah.
So this has a great story. So back in the 1950s, a guy was a lawyer in Back Bay, and he was walking along the road, and they were doing construction for one of the buildings somewhere around Newbury Street, Comm Ave area. So they had a big open hole, and they were taking out these sticks that were coming out of it. Now, back in the 40s, around 1914, I think, during the construction of the T station over in Arlington, they actually found all these sticks in the mud 30 feet below the surface of the ground. So all of Back Bay used to be open water. That was where the Charles River flowed through. So it was tidal. You could have walked out there at low tide. What happened was Native Americans 3,000 to 5,000 years ago built wooden fences across Back Bay so that during high tide it would flood, and then at low tide the fish would come back down the Charles and get caught behind these fences.
Oh, cool.
So at the low tide there would be only a little bit of water left back there, if any. The natives could come out there and collect all the fish from behind these fish.
That's
these
really
fences.
smart.
So it's called a fish weir. So they were found about 100 years ago now. So we've known that they've been out there. We've looked for them quite a few times. Every time there's a major construction project in Back Bay, we know that they could be finding fish weirs, so we've taken that into account. This is from the 50s, where a gentleman actually saw fish weir stakes coming out of the ground, picked them up, put them in a mason jar, and put them in water, and they've been in that jar since. So these are some of the only wooden fish weir stakes that survive in any sort of water. Some of them have been preserved and they don't look the same.
Yeah.
But you can actually see that some of them have bends in them where the weight of all the mud settling on top of the stakes over thousands of years has actually started to crush them.
Yeah.
So these are some of the oldest man-made constructions in Boston. In fact, some of the oldest man-made constructions in the whole country. And this is one of the only places that we actually have examples of the fish weirs looking like they did when they were still in the ground being used.
Wow.
So this is a great little artifact. It has a great story because the guy just found it in the 50s and put it in a jar.
You just put it in a jar.
And we
And
managed to get
it
to the
stays
lab.
good in this water.
Apparently. We try not to touch it too much.
Yeah.
We try not to do much to it. You can see the rubber starting to crack a little bit.
Yeah.
We're afraid to do too much to it because we don't want to disturb it. It's been doing pretty well in there for 50 years. They're 3,000-year-old sticks that were hand cut by Native Americans. We don't want to do anything to mess with them at this point, so we're just kind of leaving them. We cover it in fabric during the day just to protect it from the light.
No kidding. So, can people come and see this stuff?
Yeah,
Like,
so Normally these are all in boxes just because we don't have a lot of storage area, don't have a lot of display area. As you can see behind us, we actually have new exhibit space that we're going to do a rotating exhibits of the collections. We have, again, 1 million artifacts, so we have plenty to put on display. So this is actually an exhibit of Brook Farm. It's a transcendentalist community from the 1840s and only lasted about 6 years before they ran out of money and collapsed. But it was a great social experiment to see, could we create this utopian community here in Boston and see if we can live on these new transcendentalist ideas and kind of scholarly farmers, essentially. It didn't work so well. They quickly ran out of money. But back in the 90s, there was a large dig done at the site. So we have 5 cases here, one of which shows the colonial site that existed on the site before the Brook farmers came. We actually have some Native American artifacts on display. The rest of the collection, these 3 cases here, are actually artifacts from the utopian community.
Wow.
Now, if you go to Brook Farm now, it's a National Historic Landmark, so that all the buildings have burned down since they've been constructed, so that when you go there, it's just kind of a park, essentially. This is basically the only remains that are there of Brook Farm that you can actually see today. So we have all these artifacts plus another 60 boxes, so we still have more to go, but we wanted to have this exhibit to kind of show just what the physical stuff that was left behind by these people in this incredibly insignificant experiment that happened here in Boston. And then we end in this case, which is, because we want to cover the whole story. We're all about the complete story of human history.
So that spot of land, it was Native American, then Brook Farm.
And then afterwards it went to, there was a Civil War camp there called Camp Andrew. It didn't last very long, but they left behind enough that we actually found it archaeologically, from whiskey bottles to coins to some of the ammunition and buttons. After the Civil War, there was 2 orphanages there, and we don't get a lot of digs at orphanages, so it's a really interesting site because it has such a great story. And so we have a lot of toys, a lot of buttons that survived. This is a great story down here. These 2, this is a cop and robber figurine, was found underneath a metal school bell. So the archaeologists were thinking they found the bell, they lifted up the bell, and then underneath that was these 2 toys.
That is unbelievable. That's so cool.
So we're all about the complete story. So even though Brook Farm is what makes the site significant, we're about telling the entire story of what happened there from beginning to end. If there's any part of it, we want to tell the whole story.
And this is a new endeavor for you.
New endeavor. This actually just opened a week ago. It's going to be up until June. And Tuesday through Fridays, we're going to be open here at the lab. People can come and see the exhibit. After that, we're going to reduce it down to 1 permanent case for Brook Farm, and then the other 4 cases are going to be circulated through, maybe we'll do like the chamber pots of Charlestown, and we have a bunch of them, or like, the Revolutionary War, where we can show some of the cannons and show some of the destruction that happened in Charlestown. We might dedicate one to the Native Americans on Boston Common, that kind of thing. We just want to show these artifacts, because right now we have 1,700 boxes, but they're boxes, and nobody wants to come and see a bunch of boxes. They want to see the stuff, and we want to tell the story.
So what drives you to do this? I mean, we've seen boxes of things. We've seen the tedium of cataloging this stuff. I mean, it seems like a ton of work. You're a one-man operation with volunteers. I mean, what is driving you to do all of this?
It's the discovery. I mean, between opening up a box and not knowing what's in it, because I inherited these 1,700 boxes when I started as city archaeologist. I don't know what's in these boxes in a lot of cases. So I'm discovering new artifacts that have been discovered 20 years ago. The potential out there for doing digs in the future, it's everywhere, all across the city. And we're actually in the process of planning to do digs this summer. We haven't finalized anything yet, but there's always the potential for more information to come out. And it's a lot of fun. I mean, we get to dig in the dirt, we get to find new things, and when we're going through the collections, we discover new sites while we're doing it. Some sites that have never been recorded, we're finding in the collection. So we're still actually doing these daily discoveries. And then generally we just kind of go through old stuff. I mean, it's a lot of tedious work, but the amount of information that you can get out of a single thing is so great that everything that you touch has a story. And so you can always kind of entertain yourself by looking at the artifacts and just trying to figure out what is this, why was it important, what did it mean, why is it here, why was it not somewhere else, who threw it out, why did they throw it out, what does this all mean? It's all little mysteries. Every artifact is a little mystery. And so it's just fun. That's what I do, it's fun.
Well, thanks for opening your door to us today and showing us a little bit about what's going on beneath our feet when we don't even know it here in Boston.
Everywhere but Lisa. That's the greatest thing about the city of Boston.
I gotta say, the place is surprisingly clean.
Yeah. Come back on some other days when we get some new collections in and we're cleaning all the mud off of everything.